Hi. A point to open up with regards to the structure of constructs and systems in the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious mind that we can utilize to assist and support in the compression of process in walking the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious mind together at the same time, and almost immediately go into practical living application in changing self through all three minds simultaneously. And it works as follows. So I want to utilize the example of one conscious mind construct, which is, for example, comparison. Now, comparison would be one structure or a construct that the mind would utilize in the conscious mind to possess a being within the nature of comparison. Now, how the mind operate in how it is manifested is according to pillars, where it'll have backup pillars within itself of constructs of the exact same or similar nature as comparison to fall back on in case or when it would or could be needed, or even just because it can or is able to in any given situation fall back on constructs and systems that are similar to or exactly the same as comparison, and in so doing keeping human beings enslaved in constructs that are actually in their very essence exactly the same or similar, but you experience it as something different when actually it's exactly the same. So yeah, for example, I'm going to use one conscious mind construct example. So yeah, for example, comparison. The construct that is exactly the same or similar as comparison is judgment, which is self-judgment and judgment towards others, which is the same point and structure that is existing in comparison. Comparison is a self-referencing mechanism you use towards yourself and towards others. Then you have also jealousy, which is similar in design and structure according to judgment and comparison, because jealousy, you use the same tactics, the same mechanism in terms of relaying or referencing self and towards others, which breed jealousy. So comparison, judgment, and jealousy would be constructs that function as three pillars within a system design of and within the conscious mind, where within the conscious mind, the mind consciousness system would jump between these three pillars, which is exactly the same or similar constructs in design, structure, and participation, but you experience them as something different. So, for example, let's say you only work with comparison and you have the pillar of comparison full, then the mind will only shift to the pillars of judgment and jealousy and still keep you trapped within judgment and jealousy, and then even recreate the pillar of comparison but more hidden within the constructs of judgment and jealousy, and then you're actually always looping within the same construct, within the same systems, within the same conscious mind design. Because remember, all constructs, all participations within the conscious mind have origins within the subconscious and the unconscious mind. So if you, for example, only work with your conscious mind, the roots of that whole system of comparison and or judgment and or jealousy within your subconscious and unconscious can just rise again and reestablish and recreate itself within the conscious mind. So in terms of walking process, one has to walk it straight through from the conscious to the subconscious and the unconscious, and do the practical corrective living to ensure that one has uprooted that whole system and in fact change self in the physical. So let's say, for example, now that we can do this whole grouping point of finding what constructs in the mind are grouped together that stand as pillars of a system. We take on that whole grouping, that whole system, and then walk it through from the conscious to the subconscious to the unconscious and in the practical creative living, and then we uproot a whole system, as for example comparison, judgment and jealousy, in one go. Because the mind consciousness system design in all human beings are in essence exactly the same. So no matter what substantiates the system of comparison or judgment or jealousy, meaning towards who or what you compare yourself, judge yourself, or become jealous of, the system of how it operates is exactly the same. So beings may have different points within their conscious mind that they compare, that they judge, or that they're jealous of, but how it works and how it operates within self is exactly the same. So if you uproot the whole system from the conscious, subconscious and unconscious mind, you see how it works within and through yourself, and you stop it in all facets of your life that you compare, judge and become jealous of, you release yourself from that whole system in one go, and simultaneously change yourself in your practical living. So let's have a look at, for example, we've now identified the three pillars of this particular system of similar nature within the conscious mind, which is comparison, judgment and jealousy. So if, for example, the mind will now jump between these three pillars within your conscious mind, within your daily life. Even if you, for example, only work with comparison, you'll still have judgment and jealousy there, and then the mind will simply jump to only judgment and jealousy. And if you've worked with judgment and comparison, jealousy will still be there. And if you still participate in jealousy, it can again recreate the judgment and comparison pillars because they're interconnected. So you've got to take on all 3 points, like the whole system, in one go. That you do through having a look at what is the subconscious mind component that is feeding comparison, judgment and jealousy. Meaning, what is the construct or structure of the mind that feeds those 3 aspects of the conscious mind? What is the nature that fills all those 3 constructs that form a system? That would be, for example, competition. The nature of comparison, of judgment, of jealousy is competition. You're competing through utilizing the components of comparison, judgment and jealousy towards others. Within the nature of the survival of self as an ego, as a mind, as a better person, as more, as basically whatever the reasoning behind or within the utilization of this whole system. The point is its design and its structure and how it's existent within an ourself. So let's say, for example, now you've worked with comparison, judgment and jealousy, but you haven't allocated the subconscious mind component that's always been feeding those 3 constructs, and you go into competition where the mind will now basically bring up that subconscious mind component of competition into the conscious mind, and then just again recreate the pillars of comparison, judgment and jealousy, and then you fall back on into the exact same system. But it's not that you're falling, it's just that you haven't in fact dealt with the whole system that comparison, judgment and jealousy consist of and exist as, which is here within your subconscious mind is competition. Remember, in terms of process, now that everything is inverted and where the mind is unified as self, as the conscious, subconscious, unconscious mind in the physical, we'll be walking process a lot more faster, where we can start doing this and taking the conscious, subconscious and unconscious mind on in a faster way, rather than having to walk through time, through layers. We take on the whole system in one go. And doing this through outlining what is the conscious, subconscious and unconscious mind components, grouping them together and seeing what is the total network that one is accessing, because the mind is interconnected. It depends on interconnectedness for its survival, because all parts are like pieces channeled into and through each other together to be able to function as a unit, as a whole. It doesn't function on the principle of oneness and equality. It functions on parts that are interconnected. So get all the interconnected parts of one system. You get the whole system. You release yourself as a whole system rather than the individual parts, which would take time. So now we've got the conscious mind pillars, which is comparison, judgment, and jealousy. And we've got the subconscious mind component, which is competition, which is from where this whole conscious mind pillars are established from. So let's see now, then you work with competition from the subconscious mind, but then you've still got your unconscious mind components, which is, for example, memories and past experiences that caused you to have to utilize competition to be able to survive within one's society, within one's social networks, through the constructs of comparison, judgment, and jealousy within one's conscious mind. And so one created like a whole mind consciousness system to be able to function within one's world, one's reality in relation to relationships, simply because of and due to past experiences of and within one's, as one's stored within one's unconscious mind. That's bred this whole system of competition, and from competition, the network of jealousy, judgment, and comparison. So then we'll have a look at, from the subconscious mind, even if you then work with competition, let's say you've now worked with all the conscious mind pillars and the subconscious mind point of competition, but you haven't dealt with the unconscious mind, then from the unconscious mind, whatever the actual sources and origins was for having to go into the point of competition, and from there comparison, judgment, and jealousy will simply recreate this whole system again. And then eventually you'll find yourself stuck in the same point of comparison, judgment, jealousy, and competition, even though you've worked with it already, because you haven't worked with the actual source, origin, and cause, which was within your unconscious mind. So competition, let's see, have a look in terms of your unconscious, would be, for example, the nature of competition is where one experience or believe one has to compete or validate oneself and one's stance and who one is within oneself and one's world and one's reality toward others, which brings one back to your self-acceptance, your self-worth, where that of yourself was attacked when you were younger, and where you in essence lost that self-acceptance, that self-worth of who you are and being comfortable with yourself and who you are within yourself and your behavior and your living and your world as a whole, where you felt to compensate for that loss, you've got to compete for that. You've got to compete for acceptance. You've got to compete for worth. You've got to compete for love. And that you do through maintain through comparison, judgment, and jealousy, because that's how you establish your self-acceptance and your self-worth and your self-love, for example, in your world and your reality. Through comparing, through judging, through jealousy, you compete with yourself and others to make sure that you establish that network of self-acceptance, self-worth, and self-love within your social reality, only because you can say, lost that, so to speak, way back when you were young, when you were a child, where that was attacked either through bullying, through parents, through emotional or physical trauma, or something that happened that had an actual physical impact on you, where you had to go into survival mode of competition through comparison, judgment, and jealousy to maintain now that self-acceptance, self-worth, and self-love that you lost. And so we get to this whole system where it in fact originates from is self, that you can say lost, that self-acceptance, self-worth, and self-love that was there as when you were a child, when you were simply you expressing you. And then we realize now that to stop this whole system, of the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious mind, we've got to get to practical living of self-acceptance, self-worth, and self-love. That just because of what happened in the past, you had to create this whole fucked up system to be able to survive as a self in the world. And that the simple solution is becoming comfortable with self, with who self is in self-expression. And then from there we can have a look at what practical living methods we can utilize in assisting and supporting ourselves to return to self in self-acceptance, self-worth, and self-love, to not have to exist in this whole fuck-up of competition within the constructs or structures of jealousy, judgment, and comparison, to maintain self-acceptance, self-worth, and self-love, and to be able to get it from somewhere or something and exhaust ourselves throughout our lives. And most of the time we don't even get it because we're not realizing it should be here as ourselves. Then obviously we're going to have to walk a process of self-forgiveness through the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious mind of this whole system. But you have a look, it's all here, you see how it works now, you see how you participate in this whole system, and then it becomes easier to just immediately go into self-corrective application in the physical, so that whenever this whole system creeps up on you, you can immediately correct through breathing a statement of self-acceptance. Like whenever a comparison, judgment, or jealousy comes up in your conscious mind participation, simply go, I accept me, this is who I am, I'm here, I'm enjoying me. My enjoyment, my participation with these people is not dependent on them. I decide to be here. I decide to express myself like this. Statements like that we can change into practical living methods to change our participation in our social worlds according to who we are and not for acceptance, worth, or love. Thank you. Is judgment, which is self-judgment and judgment towards others, which is the same point and structure that is existing in comparison. Comparison is a self-referencing mechanism you use towards yourself and towards others. Then you have also jealousy, which is similar in design and structure according to judgment and comparison, because jealousy, you use the same tactics, the same mechanism in terms of relaying or referencing self towards self and towards others, which breed jealousy. So comparison fall back on constructs and systems that are similar to or exactly the same as comparison, and in so doing keeping human beings enslaved in constructs that are actually in their very essence exactly the same or similar. But you experience it as something different when actually it's exactly the same. So yeah, for example, I'm going to use one conscious mind construct example. So yeah, for example, comparison. The construct is exactly the same or similar as comparison. Hi. A point to open up with regards to the structure of constructs and systems in the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious mind that we can utilize to assist and support in the compression of process in walking the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious mind together at the same time, and almost immediately go into practical living application in changing self through all three minds simultaneously. And it works as follows. So I want to utilize the example of one conscious mind construct, which is, for example, comparison. Now, comparison would be one structure of or a construct that the mind would utilize in the conscious mind to possess a being within the nature of comparison. Now, how the mind operate in how it is manifested is according to pillars, where it'll have backup pillars within itself of constructs of the exact same or similar nature as comparison to fall back on in case or when it would or could be needed, or even just because it can or is able to in any given